organizes, how is that going to change? And some vision of how this would operate if it were scale and if it were permanent needs to precede a decision to take something to scale, because otherwise you're working blind. You're working with a hope and a dream, but not necessarily with any plan for trying to get there. Once you start out with that vision, the second piece is to not be so wedded to it that you can't learn and change along the way. Because if you learn anything from experience, it's that this is never a straight line. Never. And people who think they've got a clear pathway for taking something to scale have never scaled anything. Because if you get anyone at the end of the story tell you the truth about the story, they'll depict for you a very meandering path from the point of departure to the point of conclusion.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I also a way to identify resources to do what you need to do. I mean, funding is probably going to be one of the major ones, because a number of the projects sometimes don't get scaled up because there's a lack of resources. So is there anything that has been done creatively that we could even consider as we go about scaling our projects? Whoever
I'm happy to speak to that, but if somebody wants to go first, that's fine too. Okay, let me start and see if I provoke anybody else with it with this comment. For resources for scaling, I'm sorry to tell you, are much more challenging to identify than they ought to be. I just got off a call just before joining you today that talked about trying to work with donors to mainstream a focus on scaling into their program. So the people I was interviewing on that were a vice president from the World Bank, a deputy managing director of the Gates Foundation, someone from IDRC in Canada, and people from USAID. And the question was, well, what about this? Because people are very willing to invest in innovation. Basically, we can always use more resources, but the problem is not money for innovation, in my opinion. And if you look at the other end, we've got systems that deliver goods and services, but trying to find those best practices and move them across to making them the new normal, that's what I would call the broken part of the business cycle. And I think it calls for functions just like Prof. Harriet was talking about before. For example, somebody really actively vetting the possibilities, somebody taking responsibility for bringing together the stakeholders, somebody responsible for packaging the investment, somebody involved in trying to really mobilize and advocate for the budgets on the government side and on the private sector side. This is the kind of role, to some extent, PIOJ is playing on the programs that you're doing. Those are, for me, I would call them intermediation roles, are critical to making this whole thing happen. Otherwise, you have innovators and service deliverers, but the two don't come together. It's like two different communities. And so I've often tried to present this as being like three gears, with the intermediation gear being like the clutch between the other two gears. And saying that unless that's really engaged, you have the other two spinning very nicely, but they don't ever find one another. So my pitch when I'm talking to donors is stop funding innovation, fund the intermediation, because it's the broken part of the cycle right now.
Okay, thank you so much for that point, and I hope all our international development partners who are watching on the platform heard what you just said, so that when we approach them for extra funding, that they'll say, oh yes, that's based on what Mr. Cooley said. So my next question would be, at what stage of the project cycle should we be considering scalability? Should it be something that we're considering right at the start, so as we're designing this initiative or we're putting something forward, in our back of our minds, we're already thinking, in 3 years after this pilot phase is done, I'm going to want to scale this up? Or is it something that we do after we have put the project in, we have seen the pilot, we said, yes, there's some potential here. Yes, I like the feeling I'm getting here. We should consider scale up now.
Don't do that last thing.
Okay.
I'm telling you, if you do the last thing, you're going to have the same batting average that others do, which is about 1 out of 20.
Okay. Okay.
There's a very strange psychology that's necessary for scaling. The way I describe it is You need to have 1 foot on the brake and 1 foot on the accelerator at the same time. In other words, right from the beginning, you have to be thinking about everything you would need to think about if you were going to scale, even though you don't yet know that you should. And the foot on the brake needs to be like a conscience, saying, constantly asking yourself, should we do this? But if you wait until the answer is into that question, it's too late to do the things you need to do to lay the foundations for scaling. Okay. So you want people, even at the beginning, even when they don't know, to be acting as if the possibility at least existed that this is something we want to scale. That's very difficult to do, because when people do that, they tend to fall in love with the intervention, and then they start scaling it too quickly. So I'm not saying you should actually go to scale it. I'm saying you need to lay the foundations for scaling, or else it's going to be too late when you get back to that problem.
Okay. Thank you for
I absolutely want to agree with that. I think when I do evaluations of programs and we look at sustainability, too often it's asked right at the end of the project, okay, well, now we've done it, who are we going to throw this over to? You can't do that. You have to be designing, and Dr. Kroll talked about co-creation. I think co-creation only works if you do it at the beginning. You're co-designing, you're co-developing. You can't say, okay, we're co-creating something we've already created. Here, it's yours now. You go and find the funding, right? That doesn't work. And it talks to how you build partnerships as well. All of this has to be from the start all the way through. And as Mr. Cooley said, your monitoring and evaluations are steps in the process to say, here's a checkpoint. Should we still be trying to do this? And if not, let's kill it and invest our resources elsewhere. Now, if the data isn't in yet, then, and it might not be in, we also got to remember, we talk about building relationships, and I think it's absolutely crucial. But people change in posts over time, and particularly it was mentioned who gets the funding. Well, ministers and permanent secretaries are amazing at finding funding if it's something that they really want to do. So I think they hold a big place in this, but they also change, and the political direction changes, and we have to be aware and cognizant of that, and place this in the political cycle and build relationships that are deeper than just the individuals at the top.
And maybe a way to institutionalize it would be, like today, big grants and funds have kind of that inbuilt requirement that one has to outline a mechanism for evaluation up front, right? And we could think of something like that too with regard to scaling. So as a part of the submission of the application, already to outline what would be the steps, what would be important milestones, what could be done to think through some of the scaling questions, including resources, and have that already up front, even though, as Larry Cooley said, it doesn't always mean that the project will be scaled, but this is important planning that may have to happen up front.
And I like the fact you raised that point about the whole issue of co-creation and partnership, because if you do it early on in the project, it also helps you. So, for example, if the agency that's supposed to deal with sustainability does not have the capacity that it needs at the start, it gives you a chance to build the capacity in that agency so that by the time it's ready for transfer, that they are ready. Okay.
Too, if you're doing community renewal, right? And you're thinking about scalability at the very beginning, I think you're likely to have a better appreciation of the assets that reside in the community. I think huge untapped resources are there, human resources, competencies, to bring about the kinds of changes that you require. We tend too much to look at resources as transfers from outside.
Agreed. Okay, so now there's so much to discuss, but we're getting close to the end. But before we do, I have one question to ask that has been sent in by someone on one of our platforms. And the question is, what policy mechanisms can be put in place and driven by whom to ensure the scale or critical mass needed to transform a community is achieved, impacting 10 out of 10,000 may be a waste of resources if the objective is community transformation. So the thing about it is what policy mechanism can be put in place, driven by whom, to ensure scale or critical mass needed to transform a community. How do we ensure that we achieve that? What are the policy mechanisms that we need to consider as a country? So I guess for all our panelists, it'd be like saying, what would be your charge to the government of Jamaica? This is what you need to do. You want to see transformation? This is where we tell you need to do. So I guess you could also see it as a wrap-up, I guess. You get parting words from our panelists. What would you say to the government of Jamaica? So who would you want to start with? Mr. Cooley or Prof, you want to go first for this one?
That's a very broad one, and I can understand why my colleagues on the panel are a bit reluctant to say anything here. But what I would say to government is, one, be clear on what you want to change. So when we're talking community transformation, I know that there are elements of it that we have now. There's the physical community as physical space, and you want to transfer that. But we also want to transform behavior, right? That is the key thing, right? So just clarity and focus on that. And I think a big challenge at the policy level too is some kind of direction in that approximates, if you wish, a theory of change for our communities, right? And on that basis, commitment of the resources for resources that are required for effective scaling to get national outcomes, not just community level outcomes now.
Okay. And my other panelists, Mr. Cooley, Dr. Crow, Mr. Rees.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so in the UK, the Treasury plays a really important role here. It holds the purse strings. We don't have so much by way of funding from the likes of IDB and other donor agencies. It's blessed not to have to rely on that. But I think whoever holds the purse strings has a very powerful role in that, and can help design the process and oversee the quality of the process that allows new things to come into the funnel and then funnel them down to, yes, this is something that we want to do. Now, in Jamaica, I'm not sure where that sits. Not just the funding side, but it seems like you have some ready-made bodies. The NCVP I mentioned. You have this organisation whose remit seems to be exactly this. You have cabinet, so that you have options, but one needs to be decided on and supported, and have the funding mechanisms to make those decisions. That would be my one suggestion. And use a portfolio approach. So in portfolios, it's all about prioritizing lots of different projects, and you've got to schedule them and say, okay, this one's going to be done first, this one's second. Okay, this one isn't ready, we're going to move this back in the plan. And it links the budget to the plan to the strategy. And I think a portfolio management approach is something that needs to support any governance body that makes the decisions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so...
Well, I'm not being polite when I say that I completely agree with what the other two speakers
I'm not going to do the giveaway, I'm just going to...
And in fact, if I were listing my one or two, it probably would have been what one of them said or what the other one said. But since they both said them, I'll keep going a little bit. And just to say that implicit in all of this is this notion that you have to make choices. You just can't do everything everywhere all the time. And what I've learned about people is people are much better at thinking complexity than managing complexity. And we can conceptualize it, but you can't do it that way. You've got to make choices, and you've got to have priorities, and you've got to have a sequence to things. And yes, you have to keep learning and making changes, but it can't be everything is going on at the same time indiscriminately in this thing. So I think community renewal is challenging that way because it means a lot of different things to different people. It means different things in terms of outcomes, and it means different things in terms of interventions. So I think if you're going to scale things, you need to break through that. And you need to be as clear as you can about what you mean by community renewal. As Prof said, as clear as you can about the theory of change that's going with this. And therefore, we're going to do this. And we're going to try to do this not for 1 or 2 or 5. We're going to try and do this at the scale of the problem. If the thing you're talking about can't be done at the scale of the problem, you pick the wrong thing. You pick something that's not scalable. Go back and look again and say, where is it that we can intervene in a meaningful way in this problem at scale and in a sustainable way? And now I'm going to agree with David on this. I think that requires somebody who's empowered to make those choices, ideally with as much inclusiveness as you can, but at the end of the day, someone needs to make choices if it's going to move forward in that way.
Okay.
Just one point I would add is invest and create capacity to collaborate and manage large projects. It's not just about the planning and the program design. The critical phase is also the implementation, and that's where you have to bring people together and it has to work out. So that's often something overlooked.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kroll. I know I had said that was the final question, but I just have one clarification for Mr. Cooley. Mr. Cooley, someone is asking, if you're saying that the monitoring and evaluation folks are critical from the start to help develop the plan for scaling based on lessons learned from the implementation. Should I repeat?
Was that a question as to whether
somebody wanted a clarification on something you had said. So
okay.
So is Mr. Cooley saying the monitoring and evaluation folks are critical from the start to help develop the plan for scaling based on lessons being learned from implementation?
I did say that, and I do mean that. I would broaden it slightly from monitoring and evaluation, although you could call it that. I would call it the evidence side of it, which is where's the evidence that we're basing the intervention on, and what's the evidence we need from the intervention that's going to allow us to keep making the decisions we need to make along the way. And that's a process not just of social science. That's a process of communication and persuasion with people in high places to figure out how evidence can really play a role in not only shaping initial choices, but shaping commitment to those choices over time.
Okay. Well, while we have been talking, I've been here doing some scaling up of my own. So I might just scale up an extra 10 minutes for us to talk, so we don't have to run again. Right. So it gives us a chance to even just speak a little bit more, because I think we have raised a lot of very interesting points here. As a country, how do we go about doing this? So I do like the idea of having all the partners at the table from very early on in the process, understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it. And as we design the program, don't look at the blue line that the project is going to cover, but look at the white space that the project is not looking at, that the project needs to get to. Because then at the same time, a question I could ask is there a minimum standard or a minimum target that we must have as we determine that, yes, we can see change here? So, for example, if we move that blue line from 5%, 10% to 75%, can we successfully say that we should see some real change in our society? So I don't know, Mr. Cooley, is there a minimum standard to say if we can get to at least 75% of the problem, we should see good change?
I wouldn't frame it that way myself.
Okay.
I think that how much is enough really is two things. One, it's a political question, what your standards are for success. But secondly, it relates to the theory of change around whatever it is. What do you mean by community renewal, and how much do you have to affect the problem for that to be the case? For example, I would say, this is just me talking, I would rather see you have significant effects in fewer communities than incidental effects in lots of communities. So that's less, it's more than 75% of the income and fewer than 75% of the communities, perhaps. But that's not my decision. That's the decision for the people who are involved in trying to make the change happen. I would be nervous if I were you about trying to have some sort of a ratio that drove that decision, because I think it's too situation specific.
Okay.
But I do think that the idea that someone is continuing to ask the question about outcomes on this and not just about implementation is very, very important, because once we start scaling, the tendency is to just keep going. And all the energy is we fall in love with our own interventions. And so all of the evidence goes to how to justify it, and how to keep moving forward, not really how to be certain that what we're doing is taking us where we need to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I add to that selecting the outcomes you're going to try and measure is absolutely crucial and shouldn't be done lightly or without serious thought. And the reason I say that is often we look at the top level political priorities. Let's say in Jamaica we want to reduce murder. Now, you might then target interventions at at-risk youth and try and stop them joining gangs and get them out of gangs. Now, you can have success at doing that and still murder rates go up because there's a power vacuum, there's a gangland war, and a lot more murder happens. Now, that doesn't mean the intervention didn't work, but it means if you crudely measure it on a murder rate or numbers of murders, you're not going to understand whether you're measuring the right thing. So it's really important that you have a solid theory of change, that you have a proper results framework that's thought through and doesn't just pander to kind of political headlines.
If I may just add a brief word to what David has said, I would put it this way, the question you posed this way. How do we get to that point when the impact of the program or project is such that change becomes easier? In other words, at the early stages, you're rolling the rock up the hill, right? Then you get to the top, and it becomes a little easier. It's linked to the idea of sustainability, too. So if you take the murder rate problem, we've put a lot of effort into it. We have made progress. 2009, we were at, 63 incidents per 100,000. Then we fell into the 40s and so forth. So we have made progress. But as far as the population is concerned, there's this huge gap there, and all of this hasn't made a dent on the problem. So linking it to the theory of change, I think it gets easier when the system starts to generate a kind of general deterrent. So people know that murderers are being caught. It's difficult to get away with it in Jamaica. And then you start to roll down the hill. And I think same too with the community interventions. There's a turning point there that you need to get to, at which people begin to become agents. More and more people become agents of change, and it gets a little easier. That needs some clarification in your theory of change, and of course factored into your scale. So you're scaling to get to that critical point.
Understood. Where change now becomes automatic, it becomes embraced, where we change thinking, we change behaviors, we change attitudes. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other Dr. Kroll, anything from you on this one?
Oh, David, go ahead. I think you had another thought.
Oh, David has
yeah, just one thing that might be useful to consider, maybe as an outcome of this conference, is to whoever's going to take actions forward on this is to do some research on examples of communities that have been renewed and what happened. Because, for example, I've done some research on New York in the 1990s that was a kind of very violent, crime-filled place, and what it took to turn that city around. And it's quite complex, and there's a lot of different parts. But I think building a few case studies like that, another one might be Medellin in Colombia, and obviously there were specific drug leader reasons for some of that change, but building some international case studies, and even some Jamaican ones, because I don't believe there aren't communities that haven't transformed over time positively. I think there are, and understand what went into that and what it took, how long it took, will help set expectations and build a coherent picture of things to try in Jamaica.
Okay. Thank you.
And to that, maybe I could add one piece on it, because one of the things that came out when we were doing prep calls for this conversation was a discussion that in many cases the actions that are being taken to support community renewal are being taken by a variety of people under a variety of auspices and in a variety of places. And I think at the moment, it suffers from the fact that community renewal remains a kind of an unclarified concept for many people, which has the virtue that it's a big tent that many things can happen under, but it's a problem when we come to this conversation about scaling. So if I could add one more recommendation, it would be the one that I know you're trying to pursue already, which is to consolidate this into a database. And ideally, not just a database, but some mechanism by which these people can interact with each other so that these strategies can be much more of the kind of collaborative sort that Alex was talking about earlier, and not simply side-by-side things, all with the same rather non-described eventual outcome. It's too complicated to do that with. And you have one real asset on this, which is community-based really means that the community is a defined thing. We know what that is. So trying to figure out who the relevant stakeholders are for that and assembling both the information and the people themselves to reach some commonality about this is a major effort forward. In the case of my own work, now linked to the Brookings Institution, we've called these real-time scaling labs. Other people have other names for them, but it's trying to bring what some people bring the system into the room. So that we're really talking about this in the same way at the same time, and there is something we're trying to do with a common sense of purpose.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point, we're going to bring our session to an end. And I would like to say to all my panelists, thank you. You have started a discussion that, starting with Mr. Cooley's presentation, it generated excitement. And then the question and answers that followed, I'm sure a lot of our partners are now saying, scalability is the way to go. We need to start talking about this. We need to start working this into our program. So again, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Cooley, thank you. Dr. Crowell, thank you. Mr. Race, thank you. Prof. Harriet, thank you. Thank you all for being here and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And now we go over to my fellow co-host, fellow moderator, Damian Hilton.
Wow. Scalability for community renewal. The time wound down just when we were getting ready to scale up. I think we could have an entire day looking at scalability. I want to thank our panelists for their contribution to the discussion and Antoinette for taking us through. We want to also apologize to our viewers. We've been having some technical difficulties. Some of the things are really outside of our control, but we have been working assiduously at trying to address the problem so that we can continue to present to you today the information necessary to help us to continue to advance community renewal and national development. As promised, we have a few questions for you so that you can participate and try to win a prize or two. And so just a few instructions as I present the questions. Those of you who are on the platform, you can see the questions as they pop up on the screen, and you will be able to participate by just clicking on the poll question. The correct answers will be presented to you afterwards, not right now. We will allow for the other sessions to be completed and ask the questions related to that session as well. So for those of you who are on the YouTube channels and don't have access, rather, to the platform, the questions are: 1, globally, what proportion of successful innovation reach national scale? Globally, what proportion of successful innovation reach national scale? Potential answers: 5, 15, 25, or 33. Question number 2. How long on average does it take for successful innovations to reach national scale and full institutionalization? How long on average does it take for successful innovations to reach national scale and full institutionalization? Potential answers: A, 3, B, 7, C, 15, or D, 20. Please present your answers. We have persons who will be assisting to determine the first person who came up with the correct answer. And so we look forward to your answers as we move on in the symposium. I thank you.
Okay. Okay.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins at one step. Broken child still a smiling, I'm a one prep. Before you judge, listen my views. Can you take a walk in my shoes? Can you walk in my shoes? Will you listen to my cry? One day I must reach my dream. Born to fly. Can you walk in my shoes? Will you listen to my cry? One day I must reach my dream. Born to fly. Me, the ghetto child, is flower growing wild. People always ask me why I never smile. What to smile about in this tenement yard? Forget I dinner money, me have to gamble 3 a card. Grew up without mama kisses or hugs, swore drugs for the thugs to buy myself a logs. At nights, there was no place to rest my head. Sometimes I found shelter in a broken down shed. In the open land, I slept on a bag of sand. See, I was sinking, no one to hold my hand. Quickly going down, I couldn't turn my life around. Now you see my face, it wears a permanent frown. What am I to do after all I've been through? Can you take a walk in my shoe? What am I to do after all I've been through? Can you take a walk in my shoe? So can you walk in my shoe? Will you listen to my cry? One day I must reach my dream. Born to fly. 15 years old, weighed 80 pounds. Malnourished, pure skin and bones. The system was stiff, my mind began to shift. Started to shoplift until I found I had a gift. Found I had a sound to use the microphone. Educate uptown about downtown. Like many before us, they try to ignore us, but they can never ignore my verses, my chorus. So I began to rise, hear my vocalize. Wolf in disguise with us and never socialize. The one that victimize, the one that criticize, the one that despise, the one that see my demise. Refuse to hear my cries, told me to stop my noise, but I opened up my eyes, opened my eyes. Born to fly. The journey of 1,000 miles begins at one step. Broken child still a smiling, I'm a one prep. Before you judge, listen my views. Can you take a walk in my shoe? Can you walk in my shoe? Will you listen to my cries? One day I must reach my dream. Born to fly. Walk in my shoes. Will you listen to my cry? One day I must reach my dream. Born to fly.
Hello, welcome back everyone. I trust that you have been enjoying the discussion so far. Indeed, we have learned quite a bit about scalability, and I'm sure we are charged up as technocrats, practitioners in the space to start putting into practice what we have learned about scalability. Let me just take this opportunity to once again just thank you so much for being online with us this morning at the 6th staging of our Best Practices Symposium. I also want to just acknowledge and welcome those of you who may have just been joining on. We promise that you will indeed continue to enjoy the symposium. And we know that this year's symposium is being held under the theme, Linking the Pieces, a Holistic Approach to Community Development. And for our viewers who have just joined us, just to remind you that our symposium, the objective, why are we doing this? This is because we want to showcase and to document best practices in social and community development and to continue to stimulate the discussions that will strengthen national dialogue on how to tackle the critical development issues. Now, in session 1, we would have heard about how we are linking the pieces. What are the critical elements? Now, let me just remind us. We would have heard and learned that scalability is a critical component and, in fact, one of the key solutions to solving this bigger puzzle that we call community renewal. There are 2 key issues that were pointed out. One had to do with the fact that when we talk about scalability, one of the things that we must think about is resources, and particularly funding. How do we fund the work that we are doing? How do we decide what to fund in a targeted way? The other important element had to do with sustainability. How are we going to be sustaining the work that we do? And we have taken away that one of the critical components to sustainability, of course, is that of funding. Now, in addition to those 2 elements, one of the other things that our research has shown us is that there are a number of policy and system-level supports and barriers that affect the future direction, growth, and funding of community development programs, with funding probably being the most critical issue. However, political support, public interest, and professional networks are also critical if we want to sustain interest and continue to promote growth and continued funding of these programs. So with this in mind, there are a couple of questions that we need to answer. How then do we improve public spending? We understand that within our own Jamaican context, the challenge of government as it relates to resource allocation. Is it really about increasing spending, or is it really about more effective use of the limited resources that we might have? The other thing, is it time for Jamaica to look at other funding mechanisms that we can use to support the work in the community development process? So, ladies and gentlemen, as we enter into this second session, these are some of the things that we are going to be discussing. We have 2 dynamic speakers, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, who will be speaking to us about effective funding for citizen security. His name is Rodrigo Serrano Berthett, who is the Principal Citizen Security Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. And he currently coordinates IDB's citizen security work in Brazil. He has a PhD in public policy and a master's in city planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a licenciature in sociology from the University of Buenos Aires. Rodrigo has led the preparation and supervision of multiple investment loans for citizen security programs in Latin America. His research includes determinants of crime and violence in Central America, Brazil, and Mexico, policing strategies in Brazil and Uruguay, and the quality of public spending in security and justice in Latin America and the Caribbean. Between 2008 and 2015, Rodrigo coordinated the citizen security team at the World Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Mr. Rodrigo Berthett.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the PIOJ for the invitation. And I'll be talking about a study that we did a few years ago about public spending and citizen security in Latin America and the Caribbean. This was part of a study, a larger initiative that the bank did on public spending, which is in this book called Better Spending for Better Lives. And let me share with you the presentation. I will be presenting a few of the highlights from this study in these 15 minutes that I have. To begin with, just to set the context, as you know, crime and violence is really one of the biggest challenges for the region. We have 4 times the homicide rate than the world average. Most citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean live in fear of being victims of a crime. And the cost to our economy, to our welfare, is huge. It's a conservative estimate is about 3.2%, according to a study that an updated study that we're about to launch. So this is it's a huge problem for the region, and we see that most countries in the region make a significant fiscal effort. We spend the median is about 5.4% of the total budget goes to security and justice in the region, which is double, a little bit less than double what the OECD countries receive or what they spend, they allocate. But when we see it in terms of per capita spending, we see that it's half of what OECD countries spend, what we spend in the region. And given that the size of the challenge of the problem is much larger, we have about 8 times the homicide rate that OECD countries have. We see that there is room for more spending. Although what we will argue here is that before spending more, we need to learn to spend better. So that's really the challenge. We already make a significant effort now in terms of public finance. What we need to improve is the effectiveness of that spending. And we put together, as part of this study, the first sort of time series for 10 countries for about 8 years in terms of the evolution. And we see that governments throughout this period have increased their spending in about 33%. This is consistent for all the countries that we looked at. However, when we look at the relationship between increased spending and victimization, which is what you see on the left, and victimization rate and the homicide rate, we see that really there is no clear relationship. We don't see what we would like, which would be increased spending leads to there's a strong correlation with a reduction in the victimization rate or with a reduction in the homicide rate. What we see is more like there all over the map. Some countries do better. Of those that have increased more than spend more than the average, which are the countries that are on the right side, we see that some have the type of outcome they would like to see, like a reduce in the victimization rate, but others have an increase in the victimization rate. And the same with the homicide rate. We see some that have improved. Among those that have spent more than average, that have increased more than the average of their spending. Some have done better in terms of homicide rate, but many of them have done worse. So really, I mean, the highlight is there is no clear relationship, and this is partly, we would argue, because what we need to look at is at the quality of spending. It's not just the quantity of spending, but the quality of spending. So I would like to share very briefly 3 principles what would it mean to spend better? First is, I mean, when we looked at the composition of spending, we see that there is a strong emphasis on reaction, on repression. And while all public security, citizen security programs need to have, need to respond to crime, need to control crime, we know that the most successful cases are those that have been able to have a balanced approach that combine strong emphasis on prevention with law enforcement, with control. And when we looked at the individual types of programs and interventions, we'd see that preventive efforts are the most cost-effective, are the ones that can anticipate to reduction to the crime occurring, are the ones that give a better bang for the buck, right? And an example of these, probably you're familiar with this example, has been very much talked about, is Becoming a Man, a program in Chicago that has been very rigorously evaluated, not only in terms of its impact, but also in terms of its cost benefit. And it's an intensive tutoring for at-risk youth, which combines in its tutoring cognitive behavioral therapy interventions, which also have been proved to really make a big difference in the quality of the outcomes that we see. That this program has led to a 44% reduction in arrests for violent crimes. And when looked at in terms of cost benefit, for every dollar invested in this program, the society, the community got $8 of benefits, of returns to the community. So this relationship of is really a very good one, and shows the power of this type of programs. Unfortunately, it's hard to know how much we're spending on prevention. The classifiers of budgets and public finance accounts don't allow us to identify clearly how much it's spent on prevention. And when I talk about prevention, it's mostly social prevention, but also police-oriented programs, or police programs that are oriented to prevention, criminal justice programs oriented to prevention, tertiary prevention programs. There's a wide array of programs that fall within that category. And we looked at in a few, or other studies have looked at two cases, at least El Salvador and Chile, and we see that the amount spent in prevention, it's very little. It's 3% in El Salvador when this was done a few years ago, and Chile 10%. So with Chile, probably it's a country that have taken social prevention one of the ones that have taken most seriously. In the region, we still see that the share it's little. So here there is really an opportunity to increase the spending on preventive programs. A second principle is to have more targeted programs. And as we know, crime concentrates both at the geographical level, territorial level, in terms of people who commit the perpetrators. A small amount of perpetrators account for a large percent of the crimes, and a small amount of victims account for a large percent of the victims. And also in terms of behaviors, there are certain types of behaviors that are responsible for a large percent of the crime and violence. So knowing this, it's terrific news for program design, because we know that we can concentrate our programs, that we should concentrate our programs territorially and in terms of the people that are more likely to be perpetrators or victims and their behaviors. So unfortunately, we did a study of more than 200 programs in 6 countries in the region, and we see that targeting is still not done as much as it should be. For instance, only 10% of programs were geographically targeted. So again, this is an opportunity to look at our programs, see how well targeted they are. There are now a lot of instruments and tools that allow us to identify who are the youth, for instance, most at risk of in getting involved in violence and crime. And so we should, whether it's at the community level, whether it's in our prison systems, in our criminal justice system, really try to use these tools, these risk assessment tools to identify the groups that if we treat them, will really have a very beneficial impact, not just on them, but on the community at large. And finally, the third principle is really the importance of being as evidence-informed, as evidence-based as possible in all the programs that we have in our portfolio. This is a table that I put together from the Washington State Institute of Public Policy, which is probably the premier think tank in terms of cost-benefit analysis in the world. It was created by the Washington State Congress to advise Congress on what the toolkit of programs to finance and with public resources. And here you can see that whether it's in social prevention, police, criminal justice, sanction, there's already important number of programs, and this is just a small sample, there are many more, of programs that have shown to make a difference where in the places where they have been evaluated. And that's an important caveat that we need to see if these type of programs work also in our communities, in the Jamaican communities. But this is a very good starting point, looking at the evidence base and whether and some of these types of interventions have accumulated enough studies to give us relief and to give us hope that really they are likely, if we design and implement them well, they are likely to also be relevant in our own communities, whether it's their parenting programs or home visit programs or community type interventions like Communities that Care, which I think it's a program that from what I know about your intervention in Jamaica, your program, it resembles what you are doing in the sense that it's building local coalitions of local stakeholders and assessing the risks for crime and violence in each community, and then looking at the portfolio of evidence-based interventions and drawing from them the ones that are most relevant to the risks faced in each community. So Jamaica, as an English-speaking country, has the benefit of having something that for the Spanish-speaking countries or Portuguese, in the rest of Latin America, we don't have, which is all the knowledge base about what has worked and what has not, very easily accessible to decision makers. So whether it's a crimesolutions.gov website of the Department of Justice of the US, or the crime reduction toolkit of the College of Policing in the UK, there are many of these type of resources that I encourage you to draw from, because we know that one of the best ways to improve the effectiveness of our spending is by drawing on what has worked and testing it in our own community, seeing if it also delivers the results that we're looking for. Unfortunately, also when we did a study, this review in 6 countries and more than 200 programs, we saw that only 8% of the programs have been informed by the evidence base. So again, there's a lot of, I don't know how relevant this is for your case, but overall, that's one of the conclusions of our study, one of the ways in which we can really make our spending more effective. One example, for instance, in the case of policing, of how to bring together these three principles are like problem-oriented policing or hotspot policing. It's something that we have done in Uruguay, where we supported the government designing a program, a hotspot policing program, which led to a 22% reduction in the robbery rates in the treatment areas. So without displacement of crime, which is one of the concerns that usually these types of programs have. I'm checking on the time. Oh, I didn't know. Well, I hope it's just let me wrap up. Main conclusions. Yes, probably the region needs to spend more on citizen security, given the size of the challenge. And when we compare our countries with countries like OECD that have a much smaller problem and much larger spending per capita, probably there is room for that. However, as I said before asking for more resources, we should to get the most impact out of the resources we have, and there is evidence to think that there is a substantial amount of room to improve the returns from our current investments. As like 3 general principles to follow, and when we look at what we're doing, is how much is it imbued by a balanced approach that has prevention at its core, how much targeted it is, and how evidence-based or evidence-informed the interventions are. And to finish, just let me say that this is not easy, shifting, and probably you know this better than I, but this shift toward this type of approach is not easy. The political economy around this citizen security is often dominated by punitive populism, by tough on crime rhetoric that we know has shown no sustainable impacts, despite some short-term gains that you can have. So it's about building coalitions that can put together this type of vision that has this type of principles at its core, and that and the one example that has been relatively positive, although it has its caveats, but it's an interesting one, is the decarceration, the effort to push decarceration in the US, and how it has used the arguments about cost effectiveness and about these type of arguments that I've been talking about in terms of public spending, getting returns to community of investments of public resources, and showing how it hasn't been effective. This increased incarceration, this massive incarceration has really helped, and how costly it is for the government without results, has helped in many states to bring coalitions from both sides of the ideological spectrum around an objective that is more effective spending in citizen security and justice. So I encourage you to also try to build those type of coalitions. to make this approach sustainable in the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for that very in-depth presentation. There are so many elements and nuggets that, you know, just thinking about it are so relevant within the Jamaican context. I heard you say, before we think about spending more, it's more important for us to learn to spend better. Another key nugget is that for us to improve effectiveness of spending, it's more about the quality of spending and not the amount of money spent. And I must endorse those two nuggets, especially when we have scarce resources. Now, as we speak about best practices and we speak about effective public spending, there are three key principles that came forth from this presentation. We heard that government needs to be more targeted, and so there must be more focus on prevention. And certainly within our context, there are situations that does require us to react, but when we are looking at how to really utilize the resources we have in the most effective way, there's a need to focus more on prevention. That therefore also includes the issue of being more targeted and maybe not too universal. We heard about more geographical targeting. What are those programs that should be decided on for us to spend? And the reality is that the needs are great, the situations are urgent and important, but the reality is, what do we want to spend on to see and to get the change that we so desire? And thirdly, and I believe one of the most important elements when it comes to spending is the issue of evidence. Are we using evidence to inform our programming? Are we looking at what are our own views? But how important is it for us to use more evidence-based programming? And, you know, as we continue to just think about things within the context of Jamaica, we know that crime and violence is one of the main issues and one of the most important priorities of government right now. And so even as we talk about funding, one of the things that comes to mind is the whole issue of how do we reprioritize funding allocation and not sacrifice the benefit of the other programs that are needed. We are currently dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, which we have seen in our own context that government has had to reallocate resources. But so the question is, how do we make those decisions? And as we go on a little later in our panel discussions, we will be able to hear some more from Rodrigo on these very important issues. Now, as we talk about spending and as we talk about the limited resources that we might have, is it therefore time for us to start to think about some innovative mechanisms? What other ways? So aside from, we know our government collect taxes, we know there probably are, there are donor funding, but are there other mechanisms that can be pursued for us to identify funding, and how do we target those new funding when we do get them? And so joining us today is the manager of the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange. And I know for many of us as Jamaicans, when we hear the word Jamaica Stock Exchange, we beam with pride. And so it's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome Miss Nora Blake. Nora is a local pioneer in the area of social entrepreneurship with extensive technical knowledge in micro and small business facilitation at the community level. She has the distinction of being a member of the first cohort of students reading for an MBA in social entrepreneurship. In 2018 to present, Nora serves as the manager of the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange's newest subsidiary, the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Miss Nora Blake.
Thank you. Good morning to the audience, and our special thanks to the PIOJ for having us share this platform. And on behalf of our board, our chairman, Professor Ying, our MD, Dr. Street Forest, the team at the Social Stock Exchange is very happy to share today what we're doing at the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange to empower and to strengthen the sustainability of our social sector in the economy. So I'd like to start my presentation by saying that at the Jamaica Stock Exchange, there was a recognition of a problem, which is many organizations in Jamaica are doing good social work to improve the quality of lives of persons, especially those who are in vulnerable communities and vulnerable situations. However, the organizations struggle to get the predictable and adequate financial support to make them sustainable. When you look behind that, there are a number of factors: weak management and technical capability, informality, which precludes them being included in the formal economy. So the capital gap problem, which is often expressed by them as lack of access to finance. Also, no regulatory no regulatory recognition, inability to therefore accept investments, and no enabling framework for social entrepreneurship beyond that which is goodwill and service. So the JSSE has come up with a solution embedded in a vision to see a robust, sustainable social sector by 2030. And the mission, therefore, is for us to create that fair, efficient, and transparent medium that enables long-term sustainability. We have some core values, that of access, making it accessible to a broad cross-section of stakeholders, inclusion, and of course that of bringing equity. Equity in terms of the gap in availability of financing. So our JSSE solution is that of garnering capital and targeting towards social good. This to be mobilized in an efficient and transparent manner. We're talking about enabling social sector organizations that are not-for-profits, some that are revenue-generating not-for-profits, and ultimately the for-profits or the social enterprises, which is where we want to see the sector scale up to. So our Jamaica Social Stock Exchange had its genesis at the United Nations among the group of sustainable stock exchanges to which it was a signatory in 2010. Also, we have now joined with the government of Jamaica in recognizing the need to strengthen social value creation, as this was introduced in the MSME and entrepreneurship policy from as early as, I think, the second iteration following on the 2013 draft. Just quickly to give you a scan, there are, when we talk about social stock exchanges, people usually ask, is it happening anywhere else? You have that in Brazil, that in Canada, that in Portugal, that in South Africa, the UK, Singapore, and Jamaica. And our experience so far shows that India is in the process of establishing their own social stock exchange. Okay, so having determined that the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange will be a reality, and it is now a reality, our strategic intentions are these. We want to see sustainability to the social sector organizations. We want to draw national attention and action to the strategic value of the social sector to the sustainable development of the nation. We want to focus 3 of the 5 Ps. Our cluster of 3 are people, prosperity, and partnership. That's our focus in our framework. We want to impact the GDP through growth and success of the social sector, and to see financial inclusion of social enterprises and all the various forms of the social sector organizations. So because we see growth in the social sector as being a private sector entity ourselves, the JSE, or parent company, there's a recognition by all that this development and growth of the social sector must be good for business. So as a result, we desire partnership throughout the economy, the whole economy, in ways that will value add to what they're currently doing to empower people through the SDGs and, of course, our own Vision 2030. So for us, our tagline is sustainable growth through sustainable growth through partnership. In that, our value proposition, has 4 pillars. We seek to work with the government of Jamaica for this purpose, to assist Jamaica to achieve balance between economic and social development. In fact, as our own stock exchange has been to one day be best in class, have Jamaica as best in class. Another pillar for us is to provide opportunity to our listed companies on the stock exchange, the junior and the main market, so that the value of their CSR can be increased. We can add value to that. We also have a vision to work with individuals and foundations in Jamaica, as well as the host countries where members of the Jamaican diaspora reside, to give opportunity to increase the impact of the contribution that we know they already make to the social development of Jamaica. And last but not least, in terms of our pillars, and when we speak to value proposition, is to facilitate our international development partners, which are already adding value to Jamaica, to increase that in the social dimension. As we seek to institutionalize and have the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange mainstay, we have a trajectory for implementation and growth. We want to start, and where we have started, in fact, is with institutional capacity building for our SSOs, and to build out a culture of proper financial reporting, monitoring and evaluating, and impact measurement of the projects that will be listed and are listed, on our phase 1. This is the trajectory. This is where we start. Basic for everybody. Then we see the SSOs going on a trajectory, implementing and partaking in what we're offering in phase 1, to see them transformed into financially self-sufficient social businesses, or the formal term will be social enterprises. This is what will facilitate them to attract equity investment in what will be phase 2 of the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange. So schematically, phase 1, we have the Jamaica Social Investment Market, where we have projects that have been selected by our subcommittee of the board, our selection and listing committee, from social sector organizations. Phase 2 will be a build-up on the first phase, where you will now have equity. The model will be that for equity investment through the establishment of our Jamaica Impact Investment Market. So this social capital market of the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange is powered by an online funding platform accessible 24/7, www.jsseja.com. Organizations, individuals can make donations, can do their investments in projects, or when the time comes, the social businesses that have been vetted for their ability to generate measurable social, economic, environmental, or cultural impact. Schematically, our projects are brought to the selection and listing committee, where they're thoroughly vetted, selected, then they are listed on the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange when a minimum of 80% of funding is attained, similar to the manner in which we list our private sector companies on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. And then we go into the whole process of regulating the projects from start to the end, giving full accountability and transparency. However, in our vision to do this and the mission, there's a missing link. There's no current legal status for social enterprises to facilitate us in Market 2. So we have participated in advocacy and worked in collaboration with the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce and the PIOJ. And now we're happy that there's a draft with government that includes the policy and the legislative changes to operationalize our JSSE market for equity investment in the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange. So this enablement is called the Legal Status of Social Enterprises Act, and it is the environment that is necessary to operate in equity investment. In this act, you will see an affirmation has been drafted for the status of these social sector organizations, from charities to limited liability companies with a share capital, which is what would be necessary for a social sector organization to be on Market 2, because you're now going to need to have equity, have shares that you can offer for security. There is going to be a defining flexibility in the legal structures for different SSOs. Further, to cover, there will be items that will cover the incentivization of our social investors and social entrepreneurs. In that, we will see clear understanding of what it is that a donor gets in return, which is a social return on investment, as against, and this is speaking to our socio-environmental returns now, as against what will happen for an investment that will receive a financial return. Also, you will have the acceptance of and the value of non-cash donations explicitly laid out in the Social Enterprises Act. All of this will make our social capital market an attractive investment space. Again, this is a schematic showing you what happens now that we have the framework in place. Critically, our social enterprises will be able to accept equity investment for return on investment. Now, at the launch of the establishment of the JSSE, which occurred in 2019, 5 projects were initially selected for funding through our social investment market. There were DEFCAN, Choose Life International, their project Shalom. The jamming organization came up, AIR is the social sector organization, Agency for Inner City Renewal, submitted a jamming project, which is a project in Trenchtown, associated with the music studio that's in the heart of Trenchtown. The Alpha School of Music had a project for a music school, and we had Praise Jamaica with a Love Changes Life project. We're very happy today to say that our first listed project on the JSSE is our DEFCAN Coffee project. And these are some of the faces of the happy young men who have been trained and who are doing very well under the DEFCAN project. Our Choose Life International project has a mandate to empower at-risk youth and wider members of the wider community to reduce violence through their peace ambassadors who will be deployed to teach the art of happiness, suicide prevention, dispute resolution, counseling, and so on. The Jamming Project, as I mentioned earlier, is based in Trenchtown, and on that they will use the musical legacy to provide, using the facility of the studio, at-risk youth the alternative pathways for them to earn a livelihood, to be music entrepreneurs, music engineers, music producers, and even artists. Everybody wants to be an artist to get a boss, right? But there's so much more of that legacy that they have in Trenchtown, which is a microcosm, we believe, of brand Jamaica. The Praise Jamaica Foundation, Love Changes Lives, is a character-building project that seeks to teach adolescents in our secondary system fundamentals, life skills, as well as critically fundamentals in creating wealth, financial literacy. Our Alpha School of Music is fully funded, we're happy to say, and they're on their way. In terms of best practices, as you look at the projects have been selected and future projects will be. Let me just quickly point out to you some of the best practices that will guide you as you develop your business plans to submit your project and to hopefully have a successful template that can be duplicated and upscaled throughout the nation. You have to identify the problem that you're trying to solve with people at the center. So it's not a money making. For that, you would go to the main market or the junior market of the stock exchange. What solutions will you be offering? That's your theory of change, essential in your business plan. What are the strategic actions that you will take to implement your solutions? Those must be clear. And what will be the impact of those strategic actions? Who will be responsible for delivering the strategic actions? Governance is at the core. What resources will you need to effect your solutions? And this is what, in large part, we will take to the market, seek from the market for you the resources. It is good to have a track record of success. How are your goals aligned with those of the donors or the investors? Yeah, we need to ascertain that early. What is your value proposition to the beneficiaries of your proposal, of your project? And what is the value proposition for your donors and investors? Please make a note of these. Now, JSE being a private sector entity, we have taken a position that we believe that private sector support is very, very important in our social development. But it is also, not also, what is needed is more private sector support for social development. We believe that partnering with the social sector to strengthen social value creation is really self-lightened self-interest. Social growth, we posit, is good for business. If you look to Wall Street and you read anything from Larry Fink, who manages the largest portfolio on Wall Street from BlackRock, you will hear him speak to needing to have a social purpose on Wall Street. So it's not just about the profit bottom line. Locally, we have had significant work from the Jamaica National Group with the SEBI project. We have Mrs. Thalia Lynn from the NCB Foundation and NCB Bank as our ambassador to the private sector, and they have been already on the social exchange a great support for the projects that we have had there. In addition to financial support, there are some other things that the private sector can do. You have the business expertise to offer mentorship, because there's a big gap in the management skills, the project management, financial reporting, marketing, branding, governance, all of that. You have resources, especially those in the financial sector, that you can set aside social capital for social businesses in terms of offering grants and low interest loans. You can also help in terms of, I think, rewarding the innovation that will come from the social sector. You can recognize through awards and through different avenues that you can attach prestige to what they're doing. And of course, recognizing standards as they are set for social business. I know it has been posited, and we're looking forward to the day when specialist managers from private sector can be seconded to the social enterprises to help them at their various stages of the business development cycle. And of course, the power of your network is incalculable. We're talking about being able to generate revenue for our social businesses by using their goods and services that they produce. Now, our experience at the JSSE in terms of support has been tremendous from our parent company, the Jamaica Stock Exchange, but also from the international development partners we have had so far, and we're currently in process with a significant support from the International Development Bank. On the 6th of December in 2019, along with the IDB's innovation subsidiary, the IDB Lab, we signed an agreement, a memorandum of understanding for a project that started June 8th, 2020, which is entitled Innovating Social Sector Financing. This is the project that is going to enable us, as soon as we have the legislative framework enacted, for us to scale up the social sector to equity financing. The project funding was a total value of $910,000 US, IDB funding to the tune of $420,000, and our parent company, the JSE, funding $490,000. The project is intended to build our own capacity at the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange to deliver. So we're talking about standardized systems and tools for impact measurement, right? These will be provided for our SSO, coupled, beg your pardon, with helping to build the capacity of the SSOs themselves to manage their projects and their business effectively through organizational processes and systems, and then use the tools to measure and report the results. Our project with the IDB Lab has 3 components. Component 1 speaks to enhancement of management and sustainability, enhancement of management and sustainability of social services sector. 2, improving the systems and tools that we would facilitate the social sector to use to measure impact. And 3, awareness raising and stakeholder engagement, which is going to be continually needed as we seek to scale up and be sustainable as more funds and more people come into the market. We have anticipated project results when the project is completed, and these are the metrics for us. 150 social sector organizations should have improved capacity to undertake their projects. We expect to see 50 SSOs listed on our first market and 5 on that new market that we will start for equity investment. We should be able to account for at least 10,000 poor and vulnerable persons benefiting from the work of the entities that we have listed. An additional 2,000 social investors making donations to social projects. And originally, pre-COVID, we were looking to mobilize 6.8 million US over the 3 years, but we're under review, having been impacted by COVID, so we will revert on that. Let me just quickly tell you what would be some best practices for you to ensure that you have for your project, your social sector organization, your social business, your social enterprise. There needs to be alignment to donor and investor community's expectation, and that would tie into the SDGs. There should be alignment with our national goal for Vision 2030. Your demonstrable institutional capacity for sustainable growth. Of course, that's part of the support that we give and the appeal that we make to private sector on your behalf, but it's critical. Your ability to have a compelling value proposition, again, is important for each project, each social sector organization, each social business. You should be able to demonstrate a track record of success. And last but not least, be sure to stay close to your core mission. I'm going to just conclude by speaking to a review that was recently done on global stock exchanges that exist, and one that is currently being considered. There are 7 that I told you earlier exist. A number of them are no longer existing right now, but for Canada, Singapore, and Jamaica. But these are some of the best practices that are cited for social stock exchanges to be sustainable, and we at the JSC are getting there. You should define your mission as an agent of change. You should link to the conventional stock exchange, be linked, but at the same time maintain independence in decision making. And in that we have our own board, and we're certainly linked to our parent company. You should be able to bridge the inequality gap in access to capital, and that's where I started, right? We should strive to promote under-resourced thematic areas. There are some areas in the social sector that are very popular, but there are needs that are elsewhere. So one of the things that we will endeavor to do is to also look to those that are not as popular to ensure that resources are available. And of course, we should look to scaling and sustainability. The implementation of a robust measuring and reporting system for impact is at the heart of what we are currently working on and will have to deliver to our social sector. And finally, to articulate our own success metrics and consciously measure our impact. I just shared with you some of the metrics from the project with the IDB, and so we will continue to have the metrics that define our success, and certainly we'll be measuring our own impact. To get in touch with us at the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, it is a number of ways and every way that is possible. We're available by contact through telephones. Our office number is 876-967-3271. On mobile, 322-4505. And that will take you, we will answer calls outside of office hours. Email us at jssc@jamstockex.com. We're on Facebook, Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, and we're on social media at JSS Exchange. And of course, as I said very early, we are online, www.jsscja.com. So we're open basically 24/7, and we're here to make that difference, to be that agent of change, to see Jamaica become best in class in balancing our social development with our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nora, for that very, very insightful and an excellent presentation. You know, today we are talking about linking the pieces, and I think one of the things that was demonstrated just listening to Nora's presentation is actually how we link across sectors. We are linking government with private sector, with international development partners, and we have heard, and also the diaspora, we have heard exactly how that can work, and particularly how that can work as we look at increasing access to funding. Nora raised some critical issues, you know, that spoke to the issue of sustainability, the issue of monitoring and evaluation, which is a common theme as we listened to our previous presenter and we listened to what Nora was saying. It is very important that there is a monitoring and evaluation framework. So let us tease out some of these very important points that we heard earlier. And so we are going to go into our panel discussion, and it is my privilege again to just welcome Nora to the panel discussion. And of course, we still have Rodrigo, who is online with us. Now, there are a number of things that were said in the previous presentation that spoke about, you know, effective public spending, and critical to that is how do we target those spending? So I want to begin the conversation by asking Rodrigo a question. When we think about the cost-benefit analysis, how do we determine which projects the funding should go to? We're talking about scarce resources. We're talking about targeting. How do we determine which projects should be prioritized and where funding should be spent? Rodrigo?
Yes, thank you. I think when we look at how to prioritize. What is critical is to use, as I mentioned, look at the first understand well the problem that we are trying to solve, and that's sometimes it's something that people go very very quickly over. We have a tendency to jump into solutions. We have a certain anxiety to find the solutions, and we often don't spend enough time trying to really understand the problem. Then look at the causes of that problem, understanding what are really the determinants of that situation we're trying to improve. And for that, always look at the literature, at what have we learned about the causes of these types of problems, and then what are the solutions that impact that we have evidence that address each of these causes. So, for instance, if we're talking about reducing violence against women, we know that it is very different violence against the violence that a woman suffers within her house than the violence that she faces in the streets. These are two from strangers, very different than from an intimate partner. And each of them have, we know a lot about the types of causes that are behind each of these situations. So understanding really in a specific context, what are the causes of the problem we're trying to solve, and then looking at the solutions. And when we get to the solutions, probably, I mean, that's what I was saying, there are these repositories that exist of evidence-based practices, many of which include not only the impact that they have achieved, but very importantly, the context, the institutional context, and what types of institutions are usually are the ones that implement it. So we need to look for among the number of programs that have achieved an impact. We need to select those that seem more appropriate to our own context, to our country context, our city context, our neighborhood context, and then test it, adapt it, and test. And I mean, as I said, when we look also at the list of programs that are relevant, look not only at the impact, but also at the cost benefit. Some of these, unfortunately, not all of these programs, but some of these programs already we have solid estimates about the cost benefit. How much does it cost in terms of human resources, in terms of technology, in terms of licenses, of infrastructure, and how what are the benefits, and how, when they have been monetized, what is the relationship that we will see. So we should go for those that, everything else equal, those that have the best cost-benefit relationship.
Thank you, Rodrigo. A follow-up question to that then. Is it possible for governments, especially where there might not be a lot of financial resources, is it possible for government to reallocate without sacrificing some other important programs? How does one navigate that decision?
Well, yes, usually, I mean, the ideal situation is where you reallocate from poor performers to better performers. Mm-hmm. And there are ways in which you can structure the financing, especially this is sometimes done in federal countries, or where there is transfers from national government to municipal governments, you can include in the formula for transferring some component that is associated with performance. So you don't take all the funding from poor performers, but you you incentivize those that are performing better, and you can think about sort of incentivizing. Usually the positive reinforcement works better than negative ones. So I think that's one way in which you can do some marginal reallocation with a performance criteria.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Rodrigo. So Nora, just picking up on that a little bit, I think a lot of times we wonder about the role of private sector in the process. And we believe that the private sector has a very important role to play in just supporting the whole community renewal process in terms of what you bring to the space. Now, the Jamaica Stock Exchange has made a decision to establish a social stock exchange.
Yes, it has.
What were some of those key elements that informed that decision? So we are happy that the JSSC is in the space to increase access to financing, especially towards social programs. What were some of the things that informed the JSC's decision?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mentioned in the presentation that the JSE is a member of a UN group of stock exchanges that have always held a vision for sustainability, right? So they're a signatory to that. Looking at the JSE has a track record of helping small businesses. So the junior market, which is, I think, probably the main portion of the success that we have had that has made everybody so proud, is that the JSE has always understood the value of small. And I think they have drilled down now to understand and seeking to support the value of the social sector. The social sector organizations tend to fall under MSME. And you find that for MSMEs, there are a number of common problems or elements to the problem of the capital gap that they face. Many do not have, they will tell you, we just can't access capital. But when you look, you will see that there is a shortage or a need for management capability, for project management. There is no ability for them to accept investment as a social entity. There's no framework for that, right? There is also not much support for social entrepreneurship, right, to support those who are interested in being in social businesses. So those are some of the things that would have informed the need to move into the social sector. And of course, there is the absolute valid consideration that you need balance.
Yes.
For real development to occur. I think it is clear that if we have a number one performing economy, but we have a lot of lack of inclusion at a level, and if we have a situation where you have a high level of unemployment somehow, even though your figures are good in the economy, you have a high rate of crime, all of those issues, it requires for there to be a balance. And I think those are some of the things that has led the JSE as a private sector entity to try and perform a role that is unique to them as a stock exchange.
Excellent. And I think that the JSE has led in an exemplary way, again, in terms of just how innovation can really help to drive the kind of growth and development at our community level, because a lot of the MSMEs that you speak about reside within our grassroots
localized communities.
And even in session 1, we were talking about scalability, and we know that one of the main challenges that our MSMEs face is the issue of scaling.
Yes.
You know, how do I scale up? I heard you also talk about the capacity of the MSMEs to even do that. And when we talk about doing that, even in terms of accessing funding, it's leading me now to ask, how important is it from the JSSE standpoint when we are looking at supporting some of our micro entities for them to be able to demonstrate their return on investment? Is that important to a decision to allocate funding to them to support the whole need for growth and expansion? How important is that in the process?
Let me just make a clarification before we get into it. If we're measuring on the regular stock exchange, people go to the market for a financial return. Which is your ROI, your return on investment. And that's good. Nothing is wrong with that. We're bringing a hybrid to the investment market where you will be able to invest socially and not get a financial return, in that you would be receiving, along with everybody else, the social return on your investment, the SROI, which is what is going to bring the quality of life that we all want to experience in Jamaica, whether you're a top investor at the JSSE or a billionaire or your people at the grassroots level. So there is that return that will come to them. But the innovation that we've brought to the space is that of equity investment now that could come to the social businesses, which we'll be able to take them to market for them to not just be able to bring a social return, but also a return on investment. So it is going to be very important for either one of the returns that there is performance, right? So it is going to be, and it is incumbent upon us, which is why part of the component of the project with the IDB is about building out the capacity of the social sector organizations so that they will be able to deliver what they promise in terms of the mission that they have identified, that this is where I want to make my contribution. So just like the other companies on the regular stock exchange, you have to perform for people to be interested in your stocks. So too on the social stock exchange, there will be a definite need for us to be able to express results, which will be read out in terms of our impact measurement tools that measure social return and investment, and there's the standard ROI.
Okay, excellent. So, Rodrigo, I'd love to take that question maybe in a different form as it relates to the whole issue of public spending. I want to talk a little bit more about the monitoring and evaluation aspect of it. How do you see monitoring and evaluation serving to help to achieve that? How does it inform the effective spending from the government standpoint? What, if anything, has emerged from your own research in relation to the role of M&E?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, impact evaluation, both monitoring and evaluation are important. Impact evaluation, I'll say, it's at the core of more effective spending. It is a necessary condition. We cannot know if we're spending in a cost-effective manner without an impact evaluation and a cost-benefit analysis. And impact evaluation allows us to say if the changes that we see in the outcome can be attributed to our program and intervention. And to be able to do that, to be able to identify this attribution, this causality, the methodological design of the impact evaluation needs to be very high. The quality of this design needs to be high, needs to be very rigorous. It needs to involve a treatment group and a comparison group, and that should be as similar as possible, if ideally identical in everything except that one receives the program and the other doesn't. And then we can know for sure that the results that we see can be attributed to our program. And that is important because what we see is that when things go well, we think that is because it is because of our program, but there could be many other factors affecting the performance that are completely unrelated to what we're doing. And when things go wrong, maybe our program gets blamed for not not having an impact. Maybe with a solid impact evaluation, we can show that without our program, things would have been worse. So actually, we are having an impact, even though we are not. The overall situation might have deteriorated, but through an impact evaluation allows us to see that our program has made it less bad. So that's and also it's important because in some cases, and there are several examples of these, we might have the best intentions when we design a program, but we may be having negative impacts. Not only not an impact, but a negative one, what's called a iatrogenic effect. There's a very famous program in policing, which is called DARE, which I'll bet, I don't know Jamaica, but I'll bet that probably in Jamaica, police agencies also use it. It's very famous in the US, it's very famous throughout Latin America. It's a very well-intended program. It's basically police officers going to schools to talk to kids about the risk of drugs and drug abuse. And unfortunately, all impact evaluations have shown that initially in its first design, then it was improved, but that it was incentivizing the use, particularly of alcohol, among kids, because it piqued their curiosity. So kids that were not thinking about this, after receiving these talks, they started being more curious and wanting to experiment, which is very common at that age. So we can only know this through impact evaluations, whether we're having an impact, no impact, or a negative impact. And in addition to evaluation, monitoring is also critical. To see if our theory of change, if the activities, the products that we assume will be linked to the outcomes that we're looking for are really taking place. And so I'll say that really M&E should be at the heart of a good performing program.
Excellent. Thank you. Nora, I saw you shaking your head in agreement. Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that?
What he said concerning the fact that you might be perceiving that a project is not successful, but in fact, and so you might want to shift funds away. And then on the converse, the evaluation could and needs to be, what if the project were not in place? Because what happened is that in doing our research, you'll find that on the social stock exchanges, there are certain areas that tend to be popular. And I think you would probably know that too from the PIOJ. You have your popular thematic areas, and then you have other areas that are not as popular, but in truth are needing, very relevant and needing of funding and support. And as a best practice, that's one of the things that we're challenged, that we will need to be aware of to enable and to make sure that those are also included in the space to be funded, so that that critical work can also be done. And, not just dismiss. In fact, we want to be as inclusive as possible, even from day one. Our approach, like when the applications come in, is not to dismiss applicants because they didn't give us a perfect application, but to even help with the gaps so that they can resubmit, and so that as we go along, we'll be able to help as many as and as much as we can. Because the needs are real.
It is. And it brings to mind the fact that we have so many entities competing for the same resource, which is
Right.
the funding or the financing. So it seems to me, so we know, for instance, that governments certainly tend to identify resources, maybe primarily through taxes or, just overall regular budget allocation. But it sounds to me like we need to start thinking about other forms of funding.
Could that be like impact investing?
You are. I think you're looking at my paper, Nora. So
I think maybe because it is our passion and it's our mission,
right.
our solution.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Is it time for us to start thinking more about impact investment?
I would say so, and the existence of the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange speaks to that, because this is the innovation that we bring, that you want to be able to bring equity financing to the social economy. And this is what impact investing is about. It's about spending in areas that bring social good. Yeah? So as we are able to launch that market, the second market, our Jamaica Social Impact market, we will be able to accept and open up another pool of funds for the social sector, which will be equity financing for social things. What I would say, though, that I would like to indicate from very early is that generally, there are two things I'd like to speak to. Generally, the return on investment from impact investment, and this needs to be an expectation that is acknowledged early, right, is usually less than that which you will receive from regular investment. So the investor in the social impact market needs to know that. So, because you don't want them to have an expectation that is not there, and then as you expect continued engagement, it withers away, because definitely it's the opposite we want to do. We want to be able to have sustainability, and we want to be able to see scaling up as we go along. So you don't want to be losing interest. So it's very critical to understand that from day one. And another thing that I'd like to speak to in terms of as we go into impact investment, is there's a thing that they call impact washing, I think is a term, where sometimes entities, companies that are involved with impact investment, they ascribe greater and more results from the impact investment than they really get, so that they can look more attractive. Now, those are some of the things as a regulator in the social space, as the Jamaica Stock Exchange is a regulator for in the financial space for the stock market, so too we will be able and want to be able to have our tools and our mechanisms in place that will ensure that there's correct measurement, right? So that there's no distortion in the market, so that people will get true impact measurements, and so their motivations will be constant, right? And so you have the sustainability. And then you don't, another thing we will want to be careful about as we look at the impact investment coming is this thing of mission drift, where people will tend to, or entities, the social entities will tend to shift where the money is, right?
Yes.
So I think impact investment is, because it's not just about the money.
Right.
Hopefully there will be enough for everybody, right? Because people will have their area of interest that they're interested in investing, because it's not just the return on investment that they're looking at to receive,
That's so true. That's so true. What about you, Rodrigo? Do you agree? Do you think there are any other tools of financing that government can look to or introduce within the space to support community renewal?
Bonds it's a very interesting tool, and it seems that you are well advanced in Jamaica in terms of discussing that. And there is a very interesting experience, you probably are familiar, in the UK in the context of reducing recidivism among youth. There was, I think, the first social impact bond in Peterborough, and they were quite successful. I think 9% reduction in reoffending. The target was 7.5, and I think there's similar initiatives in the US. There's one also very famous called ROCA in Massachusetts that also works in reducing youth reoffending and facilitating youth rehabilitation, reinsertion in the community. So I think that's it's not easy in Brazil. We've also been discussing doing things along with that type of instrument. I mean, in terms of mobilizing public finance for more effective spending, I think also another example which is quite interesting for me is like in education in the US, you see that there is a federal law that mandates that education leaders should implement policies, programs and strategies that have demonstrated impact in improving students' outcomes. So you can only use federal funds if you can show that what you're doing has some backing in terms of impact. So is moving in that direction. I think it's also interesting. In Brazil, another example, more results-based program in policing, for instance, where the program rewards the precincts that perform better in terms of crime reduction through different combinations of incentives combined. Some are monetary, but there are also others that are quite attractive, such as high quality training opportunities, or even sort of having lunch with the governor, or sort of some recognition, public recognition for good performance. So I think that there are creative ways of bringing incentives to government work
and funding. Okay, so I'm hearing the whole aspect of, yes, we see that need to start looking at new mechanisms for sure, and we see the need to introduce incentives as well to serve as an enabler. Yeah. To probably even get more private sector entities to be involved in the process some more. I mean, I know in Jamaica, our private sector, especially through their foundations, have been doing quite a bit as it relates to supporting, a lot of programs that supports the community renewal process. But I believe one of the other issues we have sometimes, though, is how we coordinate those funds. There tends to be, to a large extent, a piecemeal approach. But what do you think? How do you, as a private sector, what would you say to government to support coordination or to inform the coordination of the resources for it to be more impactful?
I think that's such a brilliant question, because it would be a part of our reason for being, the answer, in that I believe the social stock exchange, as we prove ourselves, as we mature, as the ecosystem grows, it should be the place where funding resides, where projects can be selected, where reporting is happening, because there's transparency, there's accountability for funding, the funds that have come in, and of course there is the reliability of the measurement, because the tools that we are developing would be of that quality that can really speak to informing the outcomes that we're getting from the projects, so that we can know where best to put the money and to correct where corrections are needed to ensure, which is what we're after. Remember, a holistic development of Jamaica's economy and its social development, socio-environmental development. So, what I'm saying in a nutshell is that the social stock exchange is ready-made to solve, I think, those issues, right? With the tools that we don't have now to do the corrections, and of course the measurement, evaluation, and the reporting, and all of that. I think we could get a cohesion.
Yes.
And certainly synergies you know. And I also am looking at the possibility of, if we have funds pooled on the exchange, it's possible that we might be able to attract other international funds to a pool.
And I think that right there is the clinch of it. How can we attract other funding? And I think one of the things that, you know, that would probably inspire or motivate somebody else to want to give into that pool is when they actually see that level of coordination that therefore informs targeting, that has at the base of it the issue of impact. Right, you're able to report, and they're able to see themselves in that space. And as you spoke, it just reminds me, it brought me back to something that Rodrigo said earlier in his presentation, that it is not even so much about increasing funding, but it's about smart allocation, smart spending. So Rodrigo, would you agree that coordination of resources is probably one of the best practice or value that can be brought within the space as we talk about effective spending?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think coordination and leadership is crucial. And in the case of citizen security and crime and violence prevention, it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, because basically prevention of crime and violence is everybody's business and nobody's business, because we have so many agencies that are relevant to solve the problem, not just the police and the justice system, but health system, education, municipal government, social protection. We have a whole communities, I mean, all the civil society, churches, all the community organizations that are critical to be part of the solution. And often at the level of government, we often lack a clear leadership, and so addressing that, like giving an agency the mandate to coordinate across agencies to engage communities is critical, and you know, around sort of a clear vision and a clear plan, and mobilizing funding in a coordinated manner, it's absolutely critical.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're in wrapping up our conversations. I'm going to ask each of you to just give me your closing words. Nora, to you as a private sector representative, what would you say to the private sector in terms of the role that they have to play in creating or increasing access to funding to support the renewal process? What would be your word of encouragement that you want them to take away?
I think it is very at the tip of my tongue. Our primary goal at the end of this whole process is to see Jamaica balance social and economic development. Private sector has its focus on the bottom line, which is profit. The social development is about people at the center of the planning. So we would want to see private sector focus a little more on people, which would then become a second bottom line. Yeah? And let me remind private sector that if social development is happening, is doing well, then it's good for business. If people are able, if people are more employed, if people are earning, they can buy more goods and services.
That's it.
So, you know, it's a circular economy, and it's about development that we think that private sector really has a significant role.
Like chloroquine and other things do work, like masks and, of course, vaccines. We should use the same science-based approach to solving the crime and violence problem. Don't be shy about using science. let's stop using the chloroquine and really mask up and vaccinate, get the vaccines that are out there that we can bring to our communities. And always in this process work with communities in processes of co-creation to bring those solutions and make them really speak to the needs of communities.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. So as we bring this session to an end, I believe some of the key nuggets as it relates to effective public spending and innovating funding mechanisms, we hear the need for coordination of resources, monitoring and evaluation. How are we using those funds? How do we determine if we need to continue to invest in a particular project or program? The whole issue of evidence-based planning to inform your budgeting. Sustainability is important. The truth is, funding is one of the key resources that is needed to inform sustainability of projects. So apart from the planning and the designing, and Nora is adding, and social businesses, for them to survive, how funding is important and how that funding is utilized is even that more important. We spoke about another best practice is the issue of how we mobilize the resources. Using a collective approach is very much important. And as Rodrigo started the conversation by saying, it's not so much about increasing the funding as it is about smart spending. So with that, we come to an end to this session, and we hope that you have been very much informed. We hope that you'll be able to take key nuggets away to inform your own budgeting and spending. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Good job.
Beautiful. So over to Mr. Hilton, who will take us through the next session.
Wow. Wonderful presentation, wonderful discussion, effective public spending and innovative funding mechanisms for community renewal, impact evaluation, the importance of measuring change and understanding what has really changed as a result of our intervention, and opportunities abound for social investment, the emergence of social enterprises as another way of trying to address our sustainable development challenges. Wonderful conversation. We really want to thank our moderator, Ms. Charmaine Brim. We want to also thank our presenters, Mr. Rodrigo Serrano Berthett and Ms. Nora Blake. Man, we're making the linkages today. We're making those connections. Scalability, funding, measuring the impact. You know, we can't avoid the monitoring and evaluation component that has come up, even though the symposium was not focused on monitoring and evaluation as a whole. We hear again the importance of monitoring and evaluation and linking monitoring and evaluation to everything that we're doing, not at the back end, but from conception. Wonderful, wonderful. We have some good news for those of us who Cooley's presentation on scalability. And the question was, what proportion of successful innovations reach national scale? What percentage or proportion of successful innovations reach national scale? And the potential responses are A, 5%, B, 15%, C, 25%, and D, 33%. So we're asking you to participate. Those who are on the platform, there is a prize there for the person who gets the question right. So even if you have to guess it, you could get it. Okay? All right. For those who are wondering how they can participate in the poll, let me just remind you as well, if you're on the virtual platform, all that you need to do is answer the question using the question and answer feature to the right of the screen, and also participate in the poll using that same space. Okay? So take the opportunity to participate. I will actually have 2 more questions for you. coming from the most recent presentation. So we will be looking at questions from the session that dealt with the whole issue of effective public spending and innovative funding mechanisms for community renewal. And those questions are, question 1, what are some basic principles that should guide more cost-effective spending in citizen security and justice? What are some basic principles that should guide more cost-effective spending in citizen security and justice? The potential answers are A, increased spending on law enforcement and criminal justice; B, increased spending on universal social programs to address root causes of crime and violence; and C, increased spending on targeted, evidence-informed, and prevention-oriented initiatives. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, which year did the Jamaica Stock Exchange officially launch its Jamaica Social Stock Exchange subsidiary? Which year did the Jamaica Stock Exchange officially launch its Jamaica Social Stock Exchange subsidiary? Was it 1, 2018, 2, 2019, or 3, 2020? Well, there you go. Those are the questions coming out of the session that looked at the whole matter of effective public spending and innovative funding mechanisms for community renewal. We're encouraging persons, again, to participate by using the platform. Just go to the right of your screen and click on the question and answer feature, and you can participate, you can submit your response, and we will get back to you with those who got the question correct. Well, what a day we have had. I'm telling you, it has been a whole bellyful of information, presentations, conversations around the issue of scalability and effective public funding. But we want to remind you, because it's not just about the individual presentations, really. It's bigger than that for us. It's about making the connections, right? Antoinette, I have Antoinette with me, and we're just going to have a conversation about what took place today. I am very excited about the possibilities of us doing a little bit more coming out of today to try and make those linkages. But Antoinette, from your perspective, what was the day like?
It has been a remarkable day. The topics that were covered were so critical. These are topics that we should have been talking about earlier, and because I think yeah. Damien, I think if we have learned anything from this whole COVID pandemic, is that we need to be able to pivot. And what this best practice symposium has been about for this year is about how do we pivot and pivot smartly. As you said in the opening, we need to be able to recover stronger. And so as we continue to look forward, as we continue to do our social interventions, we cannot afford for it to be business as usual. Because it is obvious that business as usual has not been working the way we want it to work. And that is why some of our problems still exist today. And so as we go forward and we learn more and we know more, we have to make some changes. And our two presentations today spoke to some of the critical things that we really need to look at. We spoke about scalability. We have over the years spoken about projects, and we have implemented so many projects that have cost us so much resources as a country, whether through loans or through grants. But then at the same time, some of our communities are still at risk. Some of our citizens still live in insecurity. So what do we need to do to ensure that all this work is not for naught? It's not for naught. This is where the whole issue of scalability comes in.
Exactly. I fully agree with you. I think just linking some of the conversations from scalability to funding and recognizing that as funding agencies continue to pump money into communities or through their programs, one of the things we have to do is strengthen the community's capacity to carry on after projects come to an end, because all projects come to an end.
Agreed.
But community development and community renewal is a continuum.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so it's important that we look at the opportunities that can be derived from social investment. The Jamaica Social Stock Exchange presents such an opportunity for communities and for entities that are so given to a social entrepreneurial model of intervention to participate and to gain funding and to have the private sector support them directly.
Agreed. I like the fact that you said projects come to an end, because if anyone has ever done a course in project management, the first thing I tell you is that projects, they have a lifetime. They have a specific start date and a specific end date. And over the years, we have adopted this project management approach to deal with our social intervention problems, but you're right. It has to be something that continues. In order for it to be sustainable, we have to continue the process. And you're so right about the Social Stock Exchange. It provides an avenue, because we have a lot of NGOs who will get resources, and the funds come to an end and the projects die. But if we have this, if they buy into this whole Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, it provides you with an avenue for continued funding for your programs.
Definitely. And one of the critical things is incentivizing impact, incentivizing change, incentivizing performance. Results-based approaches to what we want to achieve as we talk about community renewal. And, I think the important connection is that everything that we're doing is within a framework of sustainability.
Exactly.
Sustainability, not just from an individual community standpoint, but sustainability from a national standpoint and from a global perspective. Because we must align everything with Vision 2030 Jamaica, of course, and where we want to go and how we say we're going to get there, and also with the sustainable development goals and how we're moving along a trajectory of development.
Exactly. But not only that, if we should draw from the sustainable development goals, Goal 17 speaks about the value of partnerships. And the Social Stock Exchange gives the private sector a chance to be a part of the social renewal of the country.
Yes.
Because it provides a safe space. Because some private sector organizations might feel uncomfortable just giving resources to a community group or giving resources to an NGO. I don't know if you're going to use my resources correctly. I don't know if you're scamming me. I don't know what I'm going to get.
Yes.
Are you going to really do what you say you're going to do? Yes. But by pooling your resources into this exchange, you now have a safe space where you can actually see yourself contributing to the social renewal of the country.
Powerful. And you're not just focusing on the amount that is being invested or spent, but the quality of that investment.
Exactly, as Rodrigo said. Yes, beautiful.
I'm taking that one home with me. That one is here to stay. Amazing conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, those on the various platforms, those on YouTube, you would not have lost out on anything by staying with us throughout today. In fact, you would have scaled up if you spent the day with us today. We want to also invite you to, those of you who are on the platform, to go and take a look at the virtual community fair. Listen, you can't miss out on that. We have a number of social enterprises and local economic initiatives that are there, that are displaying their items, and you can actually support them. You can invest in what they're doing, because what they're doing goes right back into their communities and right back into community development. So this is your opportunity to now be an investor in community development and helping communities to participate in the scaling of initiatives that help to advance our national development agenda. Antoinette, I will give you the final words.
Well, I like what you just said a while ago about having persons invest, and I would like you to see yourself as being a part of the change. Yes. A change is required. A change is necessary. Be a part of the change. So, as you view what is happening on the virtual community fair, engage with the participants. Get the contact information. Yeah. There are business ideas. Maybe you can network with one of the persons there and start some form of business. Yes, basically. Definitely. I agree.
Well, the platform actually allows for that engagement.
Right.
So you can use the platform to actively engage those local economic initiatives and social enterprises that are participating in the virtual fair. And we're really asking you to do this. And another thing that is important to us, very important, we spoke about impact evaluation. We want to know the impact that today's symposium has had. And so we're asking you to complete the evaluation that is on the platform using the evaluation, that evaluation section on the right side of the platform, to just complete the evaluation. If you have to run, we still want you to complete the evaluation. So just do that before you log off. That would really mean a lot to us, because next year we want to come back scaled up.
Bigger and better.
Scaled up. That's the word for me today. Scaled up. Scaled up next year. We want to do it bigger and better as collectively we grow and seek to build back stronger.
Agreed. At this point, what is left for us to say?
Whoa.
Thanks, maybe?
Well, you have to say thanks.
We have to say thanks at all times, right?
Where the song said, gratitude is a must.
Exactly. And so at this point, it's a perfect time for the vote of thanks, right?
Well, it is. Would you introduce our...
Certainly. And we have a wonderful young lady with us today who will be doing the vote of thanks. And she is Mrs. Keisha Ann Slate Wallace from JSIF. Keisha Ann, over to you.
Indeed, gratitude is a must. I have been tasked with one of the most important responsibilities of today's proceedings, and that is to say thank you. It sounds easy on the outset, but many times we forget to be thankful. So first, let me thank all the participants who took the time out to first register, then to walk with us throughout today's proceedings. Without you, today would not have been a success. Thank you, our guest speaker, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chan, for taking the time to address us at what has become a very important event in social development. Thanks to the planning team of the Best Practices Symposium, who worked so hard to ensure that all was in place for this virtual event. Thanks to all the partners of the PIOJ, JSIF, IDB, Ministry of National Security, the National Housing Trust, the SDC, NCVP, and the JD TAN for all your efforts in contributing your expertise, time, financial assistance towards the success of this symposium. Special thanks to the Clarendon Municipal Corporation for assisting with the venue and logistics for the Clarendon video shoots with our local business persons. A hearty thank you to the producer, Carla Thomas Hewitt, and her team from the PBCJ, whose technical support and expertise made this all possible. Our moderators, Antoinette Richards, Charmaine Brim, and Damian Hilton, who took us smoothly through today's program. We thank you so much. All presenters and panelists, We could not have done it without you, and we are grateful for your rich insight. Mr. Larry Cooley, Dr. Rodrigo Serrano, and Ms. Nora Blake. Panelist, Professor Anthony Harriott, Dr. Alexander Kroll, and Mr. David Rees. Dub poet, Omal Wright, thank you for entertaining us with those wonderful dub poetry pieces. All local economic initiatives, social enterprises, ministries, departments and agencies, and community development committees who will be participating in this virtual community fair that will follow the close of the symposium. Thank you so much for your participation. And finally, everyone who had anything at all to do with the staging of today's very successful symposium of best practices, we sincerely thank you.